So we will get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Edmonds, and I'm with the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center. And I'd like to welcome you to today's office hours session. These sessions are supposed to be interactive, peer-to-peer sharing, and this is an opportunity for you to learn about what your colleagues are doing, ask questions of peer experts, also ask questions of the NADTC staff. This session today will focus on transportation to COVID-19 vaccination sites. And I would like to introduce my other NADTC colleagues that are on this call today who will be also leading the session, and that's Carrie Diamond, Ken Thompson, and Steve Yaffe. And before we get started, I just want to go over a few logistics. While our presenter is speaking, please stay muted. And once we start our interactive discussion, please stay muted unless you are speaking. The session is being recorded, and we will send the recording out via email along with slides. And today we have closed captioning available. So if you need that option, you go to the bottom of your screen, click the CC caption, and that feature will be available to you. Please keep your cameras on if possible to add to the interactive nature of this meeting, and that will be during the interactive discussion after the brief presentation. And again, this meeting is designed to be interactive, and we encourage you to provide your experience through chat or by raising your hand and unmuting yourself. And we would like to hear from everyone. And just a quick background on NADTC. Our overall mission is to promote the availability and accessibility of transportation options that serve the needs of older adults, people with disabilities, caregivers, and communities. We provide person-centered technical assistance and information on topics such as accessible transportation, the ADA, senior transportation, Section 5310, and much more. For technical assistance, you can get in touch with us through our toll-free number or our email, which is located on our homepage of our website. And you can also get in contact with us through our social media channels, which is Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we also provide training opportunities, which would be webinars or online courses. And some of our recent webinars covered the CRISA, which is the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Act of 2021 for Section 5310 recipients. And we do send monthly e-alerts, and we also have a blog where we highlight timely information. And we invest in community solutions, and that would be through our community grant program. And that's intended to develop and implement innovations and new models for increasing availability of accessible transportation services. And we currently have 10 grantees in our community grant program right now. And with that, I will turn it over to Jane Betzik. She is the Dane County Transportation Manager, and she will be talking about her program in Madison, Wisconsin. And I will turn it over to you, Jane.
Thank you for the introduction. On slide 1 here, you can see that is the flyer that we've been using to promote the vaccination transportation program. So we just distributed it to every aging agency everywhere throughout Dane County that we could, senior centers everywhere. Next slide. There we go. So how did this all come about? Well, like every state, Wisconsin was slowly adding populations to be vaccinated. And like everyone, we started out with the healthcare personnel moving into the nursing homes and the long-term care facilities. And then of course to our police and fire personnel. Eventually we got to the level where it was going to be adults age 65 and over that could receive vaccinations. And I knew when we were going to get to that point, there'd probably be a lot of calls of elderly people seeking transportation to get to their appointments for their vaccinations. Next slide. Okay. So we do have a call center right now, a one-stop shop center. And it's quite busy. It covers all of Dane County. We do take calls in from regions around us too, to assist if we can. And that call center is extremely busy. We get 700 to 800 calls in and out a month. And we dispatch up to 400 rides each month. All of our rides are dispatched through vendors. We don't own any vehicles. it's all contracted business. So we already had a busy call center. And the reason it was extremely busy is when COVID hit back in March, a lot of our programming stopped functioning. For example, we had a huge retired senior and volunteer program, and they decided to shut that program down. It was too risky for those volunteer drivers who were all elderly themselves. Or Road to Recovery, that was providing trips for cancer patients, they shut down. Our cultural diversity program shut down because clearly we weren't going to be transporting groups of people to programming. So all of those calls of people who needed rides were filtering into our call center. So it just became extremely busy. And I said to myself, there's no way we can take on these vaccination rides. So we're going to create a second call center. So we decided, okay, call center number 2, what are the 2 main things we need? Well, it would be obviously staff and vendors. So a little bit about our partnership for staff. In brainstorming, a lot of areas wanted the ability to have several different senior centers, have staff that could dispatch rides. I decided that I thought that would be too chaotic because we were going to try to get this up and running in 3 days. And I felt like training one person to operate a call center versus 13 different sites and different people would get us going without as much chaoticness, I guess. So it was determined that we would use the largest senior center. So in Dane County, our largest senior center is called Newbridge Madison. Obviously, our Madison urban area is the largest area compared to our rural senior centers. So they provided a staff person that was going to now be our call center person. The next partnership we had to do was with vendors, transportation vendors. And this actually was, I was a little ahead of the game because before they even went to 65 plus, I contacted some vendors and said, hey, I think we're going to get a bunch of calls about people, wanting to get to their vaccinations. And so I had already obtained 6 vendors and their telephone numbers. So on our call center number 1, we put a voicemail on there right away so that when you call, it said, here's who you can call for a vaccination ride. So they already had a resource, but that was still upsetting because we all know how expensive rides are, especially if you're transporting from rural into Madison for a vaccine. It can easily be, a $50 one-way ride. But so I knew that the cost was still going to be a concern to the aging, but I wanted them to at least have a resource. So I took those same vendors and then approached them and said, okay, we're going to start a second call center. Would you be available for that? And they said yes. So when I connect with vendors in a call center, they specifically have the staff members' names from the call centers. So they know right away if those people call that they can approve that ride and bill that ride out to the transportation department. So now we've got both our partnership with our vendors and with a staff person. Next slide, please. Okay, so we want to start in 3 days and I have a new staff person. I don't know them. I've seen them on Zoom, it's COVID. We're never going to work together, in the same room or anything like that. And they have never done transportation before. So I thought, okay, they need a couple of tools to get going here. So I decided I would get a guideline tool going and a ride tracking tool. So if you could go to the next slide. This is the call center guidelines. Now, I'm not sure, but possibly some of you have the hard copy handout of this guideline. If you do, this is the information that's from that guideline. So it's a 1-page sheet that the staff person can use to go to whenever they're feeling out of sorts or what do I do in this step, that type of thing. So one section of the guideline is about eligibility criteria so that they know to ask the person, are you 65 and over or a veteran? Because we're not going to be transporting anybody else except for those 2 groups. And then the second criteria was that they need to live independently in their own home. We weren't going to be servicing assisted living centers, nursing homes, things like that. And then last of all, they had to have their appointment scheduled, but that's pretty much how it works in Wisconsin anyway. You can't get a vaccination unless you have a scheduled appointment. So that was the eligibility criteria. And then they needed some type of information to know how and which vendor to use. So all of our transportation vendors have the ability to be, well, most of them have the ability to be accessible. They had to be able to service all of Dane County, both Sunday through Saturday, because we're vaccinating. It starts really early in the morning, goes till like 8 at night, and drop-off sites only. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So the little grid on the chart you can see, it's a quick little grid you can use to determine which vendor is going to work for the type of ride you need, you know, wheelchair versus whatever type of ride. It's a grid that can get you to a vendor quickly. Now a little bit about the drop-off site. The reason the rides are restricted to drop-off sites is because I already had an experience that I knew that drive-throughs become just economically unsound very, very quickly. We have a testing vaccination mass site. It's at the Coliseum in Madison, Wisconsin. And I partnered with public health with them, but we were using very strict criteria to only provide transportation to people that really had no other alternative, because that was way back in May, June, and I had no idea what my funding was going to be like or anything like that. So it was really only about 10 rides a month. But same thing, the customers wanted to drive through. But the problem is, if you drive through, the companies charge you per minute. So by the time they got to the site, filled out the application, went through, got the test, went out, that was taking like 15, sometimes a half hour if the lines were long. And vendors are going to charge per the minute. So we found out that it's going to cost anywhere from $30 to $40 just for the waiting time, plus the cost of a one-way trip to the Coliseum and a one-way trip back. So money would be depleted just too quickly that way. So they did have a walk-in site at the Coliseum, and that was for people who would bike to the Coliseum or walk to the Coliseum. And so we determined that I would be able to have my vendors drop people off at the walk-in site. Then they could get their testing and they'd have a will call home with a vendor. That way we were only paying for 2 one-way rides instead of a waiting period. Last on that guideline is just some directions about having dialogue with customers and vendors. This person had not done transportation before, so I thought that that would be helpful for them too. Next slide. Okay, this is the ride tracking tool. It's really just a basic Excel sheet, but we were going to get up and running in 3 days, and I knew all of this information had to be coming back to me to put into the call center software that I have. So I wanted the information to come back in a logical way that we could handle the data quickly. So it's pretty basic information, everything you'd gather from a customer to set up a ride, and then contacting the vendor and getting the pickup time and calling the customer back. But the reason I wanted a tool is they know each box needs to have information in it. So I was going to be very likely to get all the information I needed. So it was just a quick Excel sheet, but it seems to be working fine right now. Next slide. Oh, before I talk about funding, I was going to tell you a little bit about the second call center. It's open Monday through Friday, and it's open from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. So the first day that it opened was February 4th at 8 a.m. And by the end of the day on February 26th, we had already scheduled 312 one-way rides. So it definitely is a busy call center, and there's no way one call center would have been able to do all the vaccination rides with what they were already doing. I knew it would be busy. I was surprised it was that busy. What we're finding out is it's slowing down just a little bit, not much, but a little bit. So maybe things are evening out. When we first opened, there was just so many people, I don't know, anxious or whatever. But yeah, it's a pretty busy center. Okay, now with funding. Well, I talked a little bit about this. We have state funding and local funding, of course. And when COVID hit and those programs shut down, such as our volunteer driver program, culture diversity program, et cetera, there was this money available that was not going to be used. And 8521 funding was very flexible with how we could move money within programs, create new programs, because they knew all of this was just a new ball game for everybody. So I decided to take that funding, and the first thing that I determined we needed was food. There was many people that just could not get food. And I don't know what happened in other states, but in Madison, so many people flooded the grocery stores for delivery that you couldn't even get through on the telephone to talk and online too. It would just be too busy to get through. And people were literally panicking about how they were going to get their groceries. So I selected a vendor that I work with frequently, and we set up a program, and I think you can see on there, it's called Dane County Delivers Senior Grocery Shopping. And what this does is you can either email or call this service, give them your grocery list. They will get your groceries and bring them to your front door for you. And so that solved a lot of the nutrition issue from the beginning. We also ended up using that money to transport supplies instead of people. We were transporting people to nutrition sites. Well, now we're just going to get the nutrition to the people. So that's the first chunk of money I used. And then a little bit was used for the COVID testing. But now we need another large sum of money, obviously, for vaccination transportation. So for 2021, we're starting out by using extra volunteer money, driver volunteer money, program money. But we know that these programs are going to slowly start up again. For example, RSVP is going to be doing a trial run and slowly increase in providing service. So we're just going to monitor the money closely month to month and see how things go. I don't know the cost of our first month here. I'll know when the invoices start coming in now. And but we know it's not enough. We know it's not enough. So as most of you are familiar with CRISA, another funding source to help out with COVID and transportation demands. In Madison, the Greater Madison Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO as we call it, they receive all of our 5310 money. They design the competitive application, and then anyone in Dane County can, of course, process an application if they want to. So last week we had our Specialized Transportation Commission meeting for Dane County, and the MPO representative was there. So he went over all of the details. It's all still not even determined yet, but I think the application is going to be available this week. And I'm pretty sure that I qualify to get funding to pay for these rides through these contracted vendors for transportation. So hopefully that will be another large sum of money that can help pay for these rides. Next slide. And there's the conclusion, our flyer again, and my personal information. Does anybody have any questions?
Great. Thank you very much, Jane, for that really informative look at what you've done and what you were able to stand up in a few days. Just to clarify, and we'll put a link in the chat, the CRISA funds are the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021. We did a webinar, we did a couple webinars on that a couple weeks ago, and there is a frequently asked questions about that, but that's the CRISA that Jane was talking about, accessing those funds. So